At the height of the summit, when the hall above the gas giant burned with 100 banners and 1,000 quiet hostilities, Admiral Tariq Elbaz sat very still. He knew he was being watched. His uniform was newly cut, his rank patch freshly inked into the fabric, but what held the attention of the gathered powers was not the man. It was what he represented, a young civilization that had climbed from a single gravity well into a sky already full of ancient neighbors. On the mezzanine, diplomats of the Heliox Compact traded soft remarks through filtered masks. Along the far wall, the Kelzari Ascendancy's envoys stood serene and calculating, their long fingers folded. Between them, members of smaller polities shifted restlessly, sensing the drama to come. At the edge of the central dais, Broker Chask Vel of the Vrak Syndic smiled with a mouth full of mirrored teeth. If his pulse beat any faster, only he knew. This, he believed, would be one more profitable moment in a long career of profitable moments, and the prey did not realize they were prey. Lucien Baye, humanity's chief diplomat, felt the chill of that smile and did not like it. His eyes flicked to Tariq's, looking for the subtle cues in his old friend's posture. Tariq's face was impassive, but Lucien knew his mind moved in quick, hard lines. Earth needed ships. Without them, the colonies would remain vulnerable. Every mining outpost and farming station, a potential bargaining chip for stronger neighbors. The Syndic understood this. That was why Chask Vel had come. Admiral Elbaz, Chask said, his voice carrying effortless charm, amplified by the hall's acoustic lattice. You join us at an opportune moment, a convergence of need and generosity. Around the chamber, eyes narrowed or widened according to nothing more complicated than self-interest. Heliox analysts silently recorded every word. Kelsari observers gauged potentials and risks. Tariq inclined his head. Broker Vel, Earth appreciates the Syndic's attention. Tariq already disliked the entire arrangement. The Vrak Syndic was not an empire in the traditional sense. It was an organism of contracts and coercion, a predatory economic engine wearing a diplomatic face. But when one lived in a neighborhood populated mostly by wolves, sometimes one negotiated with the least hungry one. Chask activated a holo. Dozens of warships spun in slow rotation above the dais, silhouetted against the hazy curve of the gas giant below. The Broken Crown Fleet, Chask announced, decommissioned under the Salvagers Accord, structurally intact, functionally dormant. A full armada, Admiral. More tonnage than your entire current defense force. Gasps rippled through some of the smaller delegations. Heliox representatives shared a glance. They had offloaded plenty of decommissioned ships before, but never a battle group of this scale to a newcomer. Strategist Halener of the Kelzari, standing on a raised platform with her colleagues, watched the projection with hooded eyes. Halener's first thought was that it was too much, too soon. Either the Vrach had changed their style, or there was a hook hidden somewhere deep in the offer. Lucien Baye raised a hand. Under the Accord, such assets must be inspected by independent teams before transfer. We'll require access to the original maintenance logs and deactivation records. Chask's smile did not falter. Of course, all documentation will be provided. The hulls are old, but the frames are sound. You humans, I am told, are quite gifted with repairs. Making the dead walk again. He made it sound like a compliment. Tariq heard the condescension under the sugar. Earth's models, run 100 different ways, by 100 different committees, had all pointed to the same dilemma. Without a substantial increase in naval strength, their outer colonies would remain subject to pressure and accidental trespasses. They could not build fast enough. They could not buy new ships at prices set by empires that saw them as amusing curiosities at best. Here was an answer. A fleet at a scrap price. Here also, almost certainly, was a trap. In Tariq's mind, time compressed. He recalled briefings, population charts, threat projections. He saw children on Luton Station staring up at a sky they thought was safe. He saw the studied boredom of Heliox and Kelsari attendees, who fully expected humans to be outplayed in their first major deal. He sensed the mood of his own delegation, wary eagerness, hope. He looked at the floating armada once more. Old warships, yes, but heavily built, with lines that promised survivability even in catastrophic engagements. Shells, perhaps, but shells that could be filled. Lucien leaned closer, voice low. We push for more inspections, more time. We do not have time, Tariq answered inwardly, though his lips did not move. Aloud, he said, Brokervel, Earth will review the documents. If the Accord's conditions are met, we will proceed. A small line entered the corner of Lucien's mouth. Resignation and understanding, braided together. The hall's atmosphere shifted. Syndic Prime Sarai Nul, watching from a private balcony high on the wall, allowed themselves a satisfied exhale. This would go as planned. In official text over the next day, the deal was codified. Compensation was agreed. Timeframes were set. The Broken Crown fleet would be towed to a remote salvage hub in Perdition Reach and formally handed over. Zoned legalese wrapped lethality in reassuring words. The Salvagers' Accord, drafted in back rooms across decades, provided the Syndic all the shelter it needed. By the time the summit recessed for the evening, some thought history had just been made. Others thought a footnote had been written. Almost no one suspected that a new story had begun, and that the most important part of that story would not be the bargain itself, but what humanity would do with it afterward. On the slow shuttle back to his quartersphere, Tariq mentally traced the road ahead. He knew he had just gambled Earth's future on the promise of broken metal. He also knew that if the Syndic had tried to cheat them, there would be a reckoning. He simply did not yet know what form that would take. Perdition Reach lived up to its name. It was a wound in space where shipping lanes bent away, a broad region scattered with ship bones of wars and collisions long past. Fields of broken hulls drifted amid clouds of metallic dust. The salvage station Locust 9 hung at the center like a spider in an old web, its arms and gantries spreading across half a kilometer, lights winking against a backdrop of tumbling debris. Commander Elian Rocha loved it. From the first moment he had arrived months before, he had felt the peculiar joy that only wreckers and engineers understood the potential hidden in the ruined and discarded. Locust 9 was a reliquary of failure. To Elian, it looked like a library. He watched from the command ring as the first of the Vrak hulls arrived. The Broken Crown fleet, warships once resplendent in Syndic colors, now drifted under escort tugs. Their paint was scarred and faded, their engines cold. Some bore entire sections ripped away, leaving exposed ribs against the stars. Their formation, if it could be called that, was ragged and loose, like a funeral procession run on a budget. May Adagoki stood beside Elian, one hand gripping the rail. Her mind moved through the arriving silhouettes, cataloging structural stresses, vent points, weapon mount patterns. To most, the ships looked like a junkyard. To her, they were puzzles. Those frames are overbuilt, she said quietly. You could ram one into an asteroid and still have a spine left. Elian smiled for a moment. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. On the deck below, technicians and dock controllers worked through checklists, aligning docking arms, spin brakes, field projectors. Margetta Alonso's voice came over the internal speaker system, laced with the accent of a life spent on half a dozen stations. Docking priority goes to the ones with most intact cores. I don't care which one looks prettiest. If it still has a heart, I want it in my arms first. Margetta was a civilian, in theory. In practice, Locust 9 did not move without her consent. She had invested the last 2 decades building up the yard, signing contracts with whoever could pay. When Earth's Reclamation Corps came waving a government charter and a bulk contract for refits, she had signed before they finished the first paragraph. She had not expected the Syndic to be providing the raw material. She had also not expected the deal to be this bad. Within days, preliminary inspections returned sobering results. May cracked open access panels on the first battleship hull, ESS Indomitable to be, and found corrosion where there should have been reinforced fiber. Reactor sleds had been removed entirely from several cruisers, leaving only placeholder connectors. Turrets that should have been heavy thermal lances had been replaced by hollow mocks gummed up with sealant. Someone stripped them on the way out, she told Elian, as they floated in the half-gravity belly of the ship. Not just parts, Whole systems. They signed off, decommissioned, and dormant in the Accord, but they sold us empty shells. Elian's jaw tightened. We expected damage, not fraud. May shot him a glance. You expected fraud. I expected a new swear word for each surprise. In truth, Elian had indeed expected some level of falsehood. No one in their right mind believed the Syndic would hand over a fully functional fleet at scrap prices. But as teams spread through hull after hull, the pattern that emerged was worse than mere neglect. Rena Kovalenko, hunched over a bank of diagnostic screens in Locus 9's data nest, saw the deeper pattern first. Rena's eyes tracked columns of code and network pulses like a musician reading a familiar score. The more she watched the Vrock system sputter against her probes, the more an unwelcome realization coalesced. These ships were not simply broken. They had been wrecked with intent. "Pause that cycle," she told the technician next to her. "Hold the ping." On the main display, a view of a frigate's central bus lattice hung in false color. Ghostly threads mapped logic pathways and circuit interfaces. A faint pulse, barely above background noise, had appeared in the lower right quadrant. It was repeating, waiting for a response. Rena began isolating it, her fingers moving over the interface with practiced efficiency. The pulse had an address header that did not map to any subsystem on the ship itself. Instead, it pointed outward, a compressed destination tag that matched nothing in Earth's registries. She asked herself what she would do if she wanted to hide a leash inside someone else's dog. She peeled layers off the signal, coaxing it into revealing its structure. The pattern was neat and ruthless. A call home, a status report. Somewhere, a control node waited to hear from its missing toy. When Elian arrived, Rena walked him through it. "The Ghost Lattice," she said, naming it on the spot. "Every ship has segments of this embedded in its control systems. On their own, they look like routine diagnostics. Put them together, and they're a hidden nervous system." Elian floated with his boots hooked in a mag rail, studying the projected mesh. "Control from outside the hull?" "More than that," Rena said. "This is a backdoor. If someone sends the right command along this lattice, they can override whatever the local crew is doing. Weapons, engines, life support, the whole thing." May, patched in from the Indomitable's engine bay, absorbed this in silence, then cursed in 3 languages. "They sold us a fleet with a leash still attached," she said. "If we brought these ships into service as is, the Syndic could park a signal ship in a back corner of space and shut us down at will. Or turn you against yourselves," Rena added. "The code paths are there. All they would need is juice." The realization, once it reached Tariq through encrypted reports, hit with the weight of inevitability. Of course the Syndic had not simply cheated them in the open market. They had gone further. They had built in a weapon that could be passed off as a technical fault if ever exposed. Lucien Baillet stood in his office on the Earth orbital, the stars outside his window, uncaring, and read the same report. He could almost hear the laughter from Syndic boardrooms. Public reaction followed swiftly once word leaked. On local networks and public channels, commentators seized on the story. Earth had overreached, they said. Earth had been stupid. One more upstart species believing it could run with the old predators and being reminded of its place. Heliox analysts debated the meaning behind closed filters. The Kelsari strategist Haliner read the news and felt her own suspicions harden. The Vrock Syndic issued a cool legalistic statement pointing to the Salvagers Accord. All sales final. No warranty, explicit or implied. "By the letter of the treaty," Lucien told Tariq in a private call, "they are covered. We can howl and protest, but the accord was written to protect sellers, not buyers." "What about the back door?" Tariq asked. "The Ghost Lattice? The intent to maintain control?" Lucien exhaled. "If we can prove it, they'll say it's a diagnostic system we didn't understand. Miscommunication. They'll offer to disable it for an additional fee. Our outrage will amuse some, annoy others. No one will go to war over a scrap deal gone bad." He paused, then added, "The worst part is, they're right. We cannot afford that war. Not yet." In Perdition Reach, aboard the Indomitable's half-lit bridge, Elian watched compressed footage of news cycles and felt the bitter sting of humiliation on behalf of billions. He knew that if the story ended here, this would be the memory the galaxy kept of humanity's first big purchase, an expensive comedy. He also knew that Elian Rocha had never been content to be the punchline of anyone's joke. He went to see May in a sphere of flickering light and exposed conduits where the ship's main drive would one day burn. "How bad is it?" he asked. She wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of sealant. "Bad," she said, "but not hopeless." In May's mind, the sabotage was grist for innovation. She had grown up on an orbital slum ring that had never had all the parts it was supposed to. Making do with less was her native language. "They've gutted the reactors from most of the bigger hulls, but we can mount our own cores in modular cages. Structurally, the frames are solid. Some of the armor is actually better than anything we can cast ourselves. The drives," she scowled, "the drives are spiteful." "Spiteful?" May kicked off the deck and drifted past an open drive housing, knocking on its inner rim. "Spite drives," she said. "Sabotage to fail catastrophically under combat loads. You see that overtuned phase inductor? That's not an accident. And the thermal bleed channels were deliberately narrowed. The first time someone pours full power through these, they'll cook themselves. They wanted us to use them, to take these ships into a fight, to have them blow around us, or to hold us under threat," May said. "If they keep the only working ships of this class, they know exactly how they fail." "What if we don't let them?" Elian asked. May looked at him, eyes suddenly very bright. She had been turning that same question over in her mind for half a shift. "If we strip the drives to their frames," she said slowly, "rip out the overtuned pieces, install our own control loops and stress the housings, we can kill the sabotage. And because we'll relearn every screw, we'll know these units better than the original designers." "And the ghost lattice?" Elian asked. Rena's face appeared in a small display, patched into the conversation. "We keep it," she said. "We turn it." Elian lifted an eyebrow. Rena explained. "The lattice connects every major system. It's a hidden bus network intended for control from outside. If we fully understand it, we can do more than just block external commands. We can bend that architecture into a weapon of our own, broadcast back into their networks." Elian listened, and in his mind, the salvage yard shifted from being a pile of compromised scrap to being the foundation of an opportunity. Later, when he brought the proposal to Tariq, the Admiral read through it twice, then a third time. He saw risks piled on risks. He saw the glimmer of an opening that might never come again. "If this fails," Tariq said quietly, "we will have spent the rest of our defense budget chasing ghosts in broken hulls. Our rivals will whisper that we burned our last credits in an obsession with revenge. If we do nothing," Elian answered, "we remain a punchline. If we succeed, we rewrite the joke." Tariq's decision formed in the space between those words. "Officially," he said, "the Broken Crown fleet is scrapped. We admit the loss, we protest, and are rebuffed. The galaxy shakes its head at our naivete. Unofficially, you will build me a fleet from these ruins. And if you find a way to reach through that lattice and grasp the Syndic by the throat, you will take it." He authorized black budget allocations. He reached out to the Heliox Compact, who were only too happy to sell obsolete reactor cores at a discount, and to the Kelzari Ascendancy, where strategist Halener listened, and then requested access to all resulting data in exchange for quiet non-interference. In her own office, Halener considered. She did not care particularly about Earth's pride. She cared about the Syndic's growing weight on the balance scales she watched so carefully. If humans were genuinely mad enough to take a swing at that weight, she wanted to see what new fulcrums they might invent. She sent a simple response. "The Ascendancy will observe." Work began on Locus 9 in earnest. The civilian yard transformed into something halfway between a battlefield clinic and a cathedral workshop. The ESS Junkyard King, a patchwork command and repair ship assembled from 3 lesser freighters and a lattice of gantries, became the beating heart of the operation. Around it, Indomitable, Frontier Dawn, Kepri, And a dozen other hulls spun slowly, each at a different stage of disassembly. Human crews in patched pressure suits swarmed through corridors and along external plates. Welding sparks lit up the dark like storms in miniature. Modules moved on tugs and cables. Heliox reactors carefully shielded improvised armor slabs cut from asteroid rock. Coils and conduits stripped from retired mining platforms. May's team attacked the spike drives with ruthless curiosity. They broke them down into their component parts, mapped the sabotage, then built them back up with substituted materials and human-flavored redundancies. "Stress test at 110%, she ordered in the first major trial of the Indomitable's rebuilt drive. On the Junkyard King's control deck, Elian watched the readings climb. Heat, vibration, power output. In the old configuration, the entire assembly would have begun to howl and tear itself apart at this threshold. The graphs flickered, wavered, then steadied. The drive held. May grinned savagely as the vibration settled. "We took their trap," she said, "and turned it into our engine." Rena, in her data nest, dug deeper into the Ghost lattice. She built simulation environments that mimicked Vrash command nodes. She injected snippets of their own control signals, culled from the Mimir array, an inconspicuous archive module that turned out to contain a complete log of the Syndic's battlegroup commands for a decade. By replaying and twisting those commands, she learned the language of the lattice. "It's like learning to speak through someone else's vocal cords," she murmured to herself one long shift. "But once you figure out which muscles do what, you can say anything." She and her small team inserted human-designed knots into each ship's lattice segments. These subroutines intercepted incoming signals, analyzed them, and either passed them on, redirected them, or inverted them according to rules Rena wrote and rewrote in endless iterations. The first time a test pulse from a hidden Vrach beacon arrived, it hit one of these knots and died without echo. That was their handshake, Rena told Elian. "They're knocking to see if their old toys are listening. Next time, we'll knock back." The next time came sooner than anyone had expected, during a test jump with Frontier Dawn, as the modified ship slipped a small distance through folded space and re-emerged with all systems nominal. An unanticipated subroutine woke up inside its core. Buried deep in the navigation processor, a dormant trigger recognized the jump profile and lit up like a flare. It tried to bridge through the Ghost lattice, sprinting along the newly mapped pathways, seeking a way off the ship to some distant coordinator. On her consoles, Rena saw it as a spike shimmering across previously idle spectrum. For a second, the pulse began to escape into the black. Her hand slammed down on a manual cut. Power to that section of the lattice died mid-scream. The pulse collapsed, severed. "Talk to me," Elian said over the link. Rena's cheeks flushed with the fear that followed delayed adrenaline. "We nearly told them everything," she said. "They hit a dormant recall routine keyed to a successful jump. First time we took one of these things for a real ride, it would have phoned home." May's stomach knotted when she heard. Her drives, her modified cages, had nearly become the fuse for their own destruction. But beneath the shutter ran a new, sharp thread of determination. No half measures would do. Sabotage wasn't sprinkled on the surface, it was baked into the bones. "We ripped the cores," she said in the next planning session. "All of them. Every original Vrach neural crystal. We harvest what we can into isolated arrays and build our own hybrids on top." Pulling a neural crystal from a warship was akin to removing the spine from a living animal without killing it. It required precision, calm, and a tolerance for close calls. Jonah Vidmar's Marine teams volunteered. Where engineers cut and soldered, Marines broke and secured. They moved through unpowered corridors with flash lamps strobing off bulkheads, pried open sealed compartments, and encountered defense systems that had gone shaky with age and neglect, yet still possessed teeth. On one cruiser, a half-functional internal defense drone, long starved of maintenance, roared awake as Jonah's people cut into the ceiling above its closet. It lurched out on sparking limbs, spitting sublethal rounds more dangerous for their unpredictability than for their design. Jonah put it down with a single, perfectly placed shot. Inside the drone's shell, they found another lattice node, one not listed in the schematics. "Paranoid, aren't they?" Jonah muttered. They didn't trust their own crews. They trusted their own control, Rena said, listening in. Same thing to them. One by one, ship by ship, the original Vrach cores came out. They were mounted in shielded racks on the Junkyard King, where Rena and her people studied them like dangerous fossils. The Mimir array, linked to the cores through strictly one-way channels, bloomed with data. Patterns emerged. Hidden codes, emergency overrides, region-wide kill switch protocols. One such protocol, once decoded, made Rena's mouth go dry. If they think a ship has been compromised, she told Eliane and May in a quiet briefing, they don't try to recapture it. They send a signal that tells the core to cascade into overload. It tears itself apart and takes half the ship with it. Do we have the pattern? Grav the Prezi. With it does say, Kriau. One stay. In display. May asked. Yes, Rena said. And we can teach our hybrids to read it as something else. An instruction, not a death sentence. May understood instantly. We can turn their biggest hammer into our chisel. The Gatefold engine firmware was born from that realization. May built it as a drive control layer. Rena laced it with signal interpretation routines. Now, when a Vrach kill switch pattern came in, human ships would not explode. They would listen, decode, and map. Tariq came to Locus 9 in person as the first ships of the rebuilt fleet spun in slow testing maneuvers. Standing on a temporary gantry near the Junkyard King's viewing port, he watched Indomitable roll to present her patched flanks. The hull bore scars and mismatched plates. Human steel bolted to Vrach alloys. Asteroid stone fused to old ceramic. She was ugly by traditional standards. To Tariq, she was beautiful. He thought of all the reports that had crossed his desk, the derision from other delegations, the quiet concern from those who actually feared the Syndic. He thought of the children and technicians and farmers the Syndic was certain Earth could not protect. He thought of the backdoors and bombs hidden in these gifts. Operation Broken Crown, he said at last. The name fit too well to be changed. The ships had come from a Syndic battle group that once executed a warlord whose emblem was a jagged crown, breaking it on a live broadcast. Now, those same ships were being resurrected to take a swing at the Syndic's own head. Eliane, May, Rena, Jonah, Margetta, Lucienne by secure channel, and strategist Halloner, patched in as a calm Kelzari silhouette, gathered around the projection. Tariq laid out the plan. The Syndic still believes we have nothing but these broken hulls, he said. They are certain we cannot bring them to combat readiness before our budgets and patience run dry. They're also certain that if we somehow manage it, they can trigger their hidden controls and shut us down. He nodded to Rena. That is no longer true, she said. The lattice is ours. Their commands will not reach us, and we can send our own through their channels. Halloner listened, her eyes unfocused as she imagined the reverberations beyond the immediate. Golf ball-sized models of possibilities rolled in her mind. Each ended somewhere different on the board of power. In almost all of them, a Syndic weakened by internal chaos left fewer shadows on Kelsari borders. What do you intend? Halloner asked. Tariq answered plainly. We will invite an attack. He explained how Earth would appear to retreat, pulling visible ships from exposed colonies, scaling back overt patrols, how they would broadcast discontent through channels they knew Syndic analysts monitored, complaining about the loss and the injustice, projecting bitterness and helplessness. They will see us licking our wounds, Tariq said. Brokervel will urge his masters to make an example of us, to punish us for daring to complain about the terms, to discourage others from questioning their deals. Margetta snorted. They'll come here, she said. To my yard. They'll want to smash the place where we tried to rebuild their trash. Tariq nodded. Exactly. They will jump a task force into Perdition Reach, expecting to find undefended salvage stations and a few unarmed tugs. What they will actually find, Eliane added, is a cluster of familiar-looking hulls broadcasting old friend codes. The Broken Crown fleet would greet its original owners. Then, if everything worked, it would betray them. And after that? Halloner asked. Tariq's gaze went to the projection of a single, massive ship, the Splinter Crown, the Syndic's command citadel around Karzal Prime. After that, he said, we go for the head. When the trap finally sprang, it happened in the cold silence of interstellar space, with the suddenness of a door kicked open. The Syndic task force emerged from fold space on the dense fringes of Perdition Reach. Their ships were sleek, where the human hulls were patched, their formation crisp and confident. Their mission orders, signed by Sarai Nul themselves, were straightforward. Cripple Earth's salvaging capability, show the upstarts their place, then withdraw before Heliox or Kelzari monitors felt compelled to inquire too deeply. Chaskvel had argued that humiliating Earth again would reinforce the lesson from the failed fleet sale, that no one cheated the Syndic, not even by accident, not even by complaining about terms. He did not know how much his own smugness had contributed to what followed. As the task force settled into combat spread, their sensor webs reached out and painted an unexpected scene. Ahead, scattered among the debris fields, drifted warships with Syndic hull profiles. Their transponders, when queried, presented old, valid IDs. For a heartbeat, confusion flickered in the Vrach flagship's command bay. "How are they here?" an officer demanded. "Those frames were towed out. They should be under human control," a more seasoned controller answered. "The newcomers must have tried to activate them without proper procedures. Look at their vectors. They're barely holding shape." Indeed, the human-controlled ships were wobbling in their orbits, thrusters misaligned, their formation ragged by design. Panels hung open in some places. Power profiles were irregular. To Vrach eyes, they looked like botched refurbishments. On the bridge of ESS Indomitable, Elian floated in the harness, breathing slow and steady. His heart pounded, but his mind cut through the anxiety like a beam. "We are broadcasting the old IDs," Rena confirmed from her console. "To them, we look like stray dogs coming home." Jonah's Marines waited near airlocks and armored pods, their faces calm in the measured way of people whose fear had been burned off in training drills and long nights. May stood in the engine control sphere, one hand on a manual override rod, feeling through the deck the subtle hum of the rebuilt drive. She knew exactly how much power she could pour into the coils before the limits. Those limits were further than any Vrach engineer would have guessed. Tarek watched from the Junkyard King's augmented bridge, where every ship's status and vector glowed in overlapping layers before him. Behind him, technicians in harnesses murmured into headsets, swapping data with Locust 9's control ring, and with a Kelzari relay that Halliner had accidentally left pointed in the right direction. In the Vrach flagship, suspicion was quickly overridden by arrogance. "They must think we will welcome them back," the commander scoffed. "Their mistake." He ordered weapon systems powered and drives oriented for intercept. The human ships drifted, apparently disorganized, until a prearranged countdown hit 0. Rena's fingers danced over her board. "Now," she whispered, and squeezed the metaphorical trigger. The ghost lattice woke fully for the first time under human control. In an instant, signals shot along invisible routes, weaving through modified cores and hijacked interfaces. The human hulls, wearing Syndic signatures like stolen uniforms, shouted commands into the shared network. To the Vrach systems, the words sounded as if they came from higher authority nodes. Diagnostic halt, safety check, freeze weapons, idle drives. Across the Syndic task force, consoles lit with warnings. Autocannons stuttered. Main guns halted in mid-charge. Thrusters flickered. Crews cursed and slammed fists on controls that suddenly refused to obey. "What is this?" the flagship commander snarled. "Override the diagnostic. Force it through." Technicians tried. Their overrides sank like stones into a sea of counterfeit commands. Somewhere inside their own systems, their ghost lattice connections had turned against them. On the human ships, weapons pivoted into alignment. Drives burned, clean, and bright. "Engage," Tariq said. The first salvo from the Broken Crown fleet cut through the nearest Syndic cruisers before they completely grasped they were under attack. Patches of their armor evaporated under concentrated fire, internal explosions pushing gouts of gas and molten fragments into space. Jonah's teams launched in armored boarding pods, riding the burned-out wake of the initial barrage. Using the lattice's seized pathways, Rena opened and closed airlocks and internal doors just enough to shepherd the Marines through. On one captured destroyer, Jonah led the team straight to the core control node. There, behind a wall of panicked, half-trained crew who had never expected to fight boarders inside their own ship, they found the command crystals and the lattice interface. Jonah thought, as he pressed the muzzle of his rifle under the last defender's mandibles to make him drop his weapon, of the debt being paid. On the Vrach homeworld, reports of the engagement reached Karzal Prime minutes later through priority channels. Sarai Knoll watched raw feeds and telemetry. At first, they did not believe what they were seeing. Human-marked ships moving with Syndic grace. Syndic-marked ships freezing like machines whose strings had been cut. This was precisely the nightmare scenario the Ghost Lattice had been designed to prevent. "Send an emergency override," Sarai ordered. "Use the highest clearance. We cannot lose that task force to corruption." Technicians composed the signal. It was a pattern never meant to be seen by outsiders. A concentrated command beacon expressing one simple idea in the language of lattice and crystal. Die rather than be captured. The signal uncoiled itself through fold space, fanning out to every Ghost Lattice segment in range. In the past, such a pulse would have triggered cascading meltdowns in any core that had been tampered with. Ships would have blossomed into clouds of wreckage rather than serve another master. Now, the pulse struck hybrid cores and carefully placed routines that listened and translated. On the Indomitable, warning runes flashed for a split second as the signal hammered against shields, then were recoded. "That's it," Rena breathed. "That's the kill switch." To the gatefold engine firmware, the pulse was not an execution. It was a data stream. The routines caught it, unraveled it, and fed it into Mimir's storage space. The result was a treasure map. Entire segments of the Syndic's command web, normally hidden within encrypted layers of protocol, became visible in outline. Fleet groupings, relay positions, key nodes, control hierarchies. Rena's eyes flickered as she watched the pattern assemble. A whisper of awe threaded through her concentration. "They just gave us the layout of their navy," she said. Around Perdition Reach, the immediate effect of the pulse on Vrosh ships was chaos. Some cores tried to obey and locked up halfway, frozen between incompatible orders. Others crashed and rebooted into safe modes that treated all external commands with suspicion, including those from their own crews. Tariq saw the windows of opportunity flutter open. "Phase 2, he ordered. "We are done playing." He directed captured hulls to join the formation. Boarding parties, having secured key nodes, transmitted fresh control codes that bent those ships' lattices to human will. Some captains, realizing their vessels had been turned into puppets, chose to overload their own drives. Others, more pragmatic or more afraid of death, stood down and let themselves be locked out. Within hours, the Syndic task force had been effectively neutralized. Some ships lay in tumbling ruin. Others floated under new management. Elion, May, Rena, Jonah, and Margetta stood or floated in their respective stations, sharing a single, silent understanding. The trap had worked. They had taken the very weapon meant to enslave them and aimed it back up the leash. There might never be a second chance like this. Tariq knew it. On a secure line to Earth, Lucien's voice came through tight and low. "You are about to escalate from a local engagement to something much larger," Lucien said. Tariq looked at the latest output from Mimir. It showed the Syndic's main node, the Splinter Crown, in orbit above Karzal Prime. Around it, layered defense grids and patrol routes. He imagined leaving things here, with one fleet humiliated in exchange for another. He imagined the Syndic regrouping, learning, closing weaknesses. He imagined them laughing again someday, savaging some other newcomer. "If we stop now," Tariq said, "we have merely bloodied their nose. They will grow new teeth. We have their codes. We know their pathways. If we do not use this moment, we will never see its like again." Lucien was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then, quietly he said, "Then do it thoroughly, and remember everyone who will live or die because of how you choose to finish this." He did not say, "Do not become what you fight." He did not need to. Tarek's own conscience whispered it. Strategist Halloner, watching from a Kelzari transfer node, saw the data stream from Perdition Reach and understood the scale of what was now possible. Her people had always believed in careful, incremental moves. Here was a species willing to leap. She sent a cautious green light for the minimal assistance she had promised. Kelzari array ships began broadcasting discrete jamming patterns into Syndic communication bands far from the main routes, just enough to introduce delay and confusion. Tariq assembled the Reclamation Armada. Indomitable, Khepri, Frontier Dawn, Junkyard King, and every other rebuilt hull that could spin up drives pivoted as one. Captured Vrach ships slid into the formation, now bearing temporary designations and running on human-modified cores. Astra-welded armor patchwork gleamed dully. To outside sensors, the Armada looked like a ragtag collection of mismatched warships. To those inside, it felt like a single, angry fist. "Set coordinates," Tarak said. "Karzal Prime." May poured power into the drives. The Gatefold engine software whispered to spacetime in a slightly different way than the original Vrach designs, nudging transitions along paths that saved fractions of a second here, slivers of instability there. It was not much, but across so many jumps and so many ships, the cumulative edge was real. The fleet slipped into folded space. When they dropped out above Karzal Prime, the sky around the Splinter Crown bloomed with quick threat assessments. Syndic picket ships swiveled in surprise. Outer defense buoys tagged the incoming group as friendly lattice codes matched known patterns for the Broken Crown fleet and associated escorts. Internal systems, obedient and ancient, relayed that information up the chain. For a brief, crucial window, the Syndic's own arrogance shielded humanity more effectively than any stealth field could have. Sarai Newell paced in the Splinter Crown's control tier as fresh data arrived. They had only just learned of the disastrous engagement in Perdition Reach. Now, against all expectation, those same hull markings appeared in home space. How? They asked aloud more to themselves than to any subordinate. How did they get here so quickly? On the Indomitable's bridge, Tariq watched the layers of Syndic defense come alive. Weapons powering, drives flaring, patrol routes shifting. They would not have long before the mask slipped. "Proceed calmly," he said over fleet comms. "On my mark." Human ships held their course, broadcasting status updates along the Ghost Lattice like well-behaved members of the Syndic war machine. They reported false damage, false system checks, fictitious codes indicating authorized inspection protocols. Inside some Syndic ships, lower-ranked officers felt unease stir. Something about the patterns felt wrong, but their instruments showed green. Their overlords' designs had worked so well, for so long, that they had forgotten how to doubt their own foundation. When the Splinter Crown's main weapons finally locked fully onto the leading human hulls, Tariq gave the signal. The Reclamation Armada's lattice routines stopped pretending to be servants. They reached outward through every shared channel, flooding the network with a blizzard of counterfeit commands. Weapon safeties on defense platforms engaged mid-track. Drive regulators on interceptors spiked to diagnostic lock. Authorization tokens on cross-ship targeting links flipped to invalid. Karzal Prime's orbital space shuddered. The Splinter Crown, designed as the unquestioned conductor of this symphony of violence, suddenly found that half its instruments had begun playing someone else's tune. Rena's face was a study in focused tension as she rode the wave of feedback. Her modified systems were handling more conflicting orders and responses than they had ever been designed to endure. "Route that through Mimir," she snapped at one point as a burst of corrupted data slammed into her interface. "Don't let it loop back." On the hull, Khepri unleashed her boarding pods toward the Splinter Crown. Jonah and his Marines rode those pods in, feeling the lurch as external fields buffeted them. The pods slammed into pre-targeted sections and cut their way through, discharging teams into the bowels of the Syndic's command citadel. The Splinter Crown had not expected to be boarded from this vector. Its internal defenses were arrayed to repel saboteurs from below or commando drops from above, not heavily armed intruders entering on friendly IFF codes. Rena, wired into the lattice, held doors open or slammed them shut, turning corridors into safe channels and blind traps. Jonah's people cut security nodes and stunned defenders with crisp, disciplined bursts, ducking under fire, leaping through sudden gravity shifts as the Splinter Crown tried to shake them off like fleas. Sarai Newell felt the ship lurch under them. Status, they demanded. Multiple unauthorized accesses within the hull, a control officer blurted. Boarders armed. Internal drones are, some are not responding. Command routines are conflicting. Purge the lattice, Sarai ordered. Cut every external connection. If our own ships must fight blind, so be it. I will not have our core compromised. The order came too late. Jonah's team reached the splintered threshold of the central command chamber, where the main lattice node pulsed behind layers of armored glass and energy fields. They took casualties on the approach. Elite guards fought with the desperation of those whose entire hierarchy was under direct attack. Inside the chamber, shimmering control columns rose from floor to ceiling, threads of data flickering through them. At the center hovered the core crystal cluster compact, beautiful, lethal. Rena's voice came through Jonah's earpiece, tight with effort. You'll see a panel on the far right, she said. Behind it is the primary lattice anchor port. Get Mimir in. Do not break the connection once it starts. Jonah saw it, a narrow slice of metallic wall between two humming pylons. He signaled two of his team to lay down covering fire, and another to lay a shaped charge on the panel. The explosion cracked the casing. Inside, a dense tangle of conduits sparkled with restrained energy. From his pack, Jonah pulled the portable Mimir interface. It was a box not much larger than his helmet, studded with connectors and emitters. He pressed it against the exposed node and clicked it into place. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the world shrank to the scream of data. On the Splinter Crown's main node, the Ghost Lattice met its own reflection. The Mimir array, swollen now with captured codes, override structures, and top-level commands, presented itself to the network as the ultimate authority it had been taught to mimic. It spoke in Sarai Nul's house-key patterns, but with clearer force and without the drift of panicked hands on controls. To ships across the Syndic-armed web, the difference was academic. They were built to obey the highest signal. Stand down, the new stream said. Disarm, lock out all local command. Safety priority. 1,000 cores, 10,000 nodes, listened. On distant front lines, where Syndic fleets had been bullying minor neighbors, weapons lowered in eerie synchronization. Drives cycled into standby. Tactical links froze. Commanders barked orders that fell onto deaf code. In orbit above Karzal Prime, some crews tried to physically yank connectors and smash consoles, but it was like tearing out their own nervous systems mid-breath. Sarai Nul stared at cascading status loss on their personal display and realized, with numbing clarity, that control had been stolen not through brute force, but through their own hubris. Broker Chaskvel, watching distant updates from a secure station, felt a cold claw run down his spine. His career had been built on the assumption that everyone else would always be 3 steps dumber than he was. This was the moment that assumption cracked and fell away. Inside the Splinter Crown's command chamber, Jonah held his position as fields sparked and dimmed. Syndic guards faltered, their weapons suddenly going dead in their hands as power rerouted. The hum of the core changed pitch, a low moan that seemed to echo an empire's fear. Back on the Indomitable, Tariq absorbed the incoming flood of confirmation pings. One by one, ships that had been enemies a day before reported themselves as armed but neutered, waiting for orders. His people looked to him. In Locust 9's control ring, on the Junkyard King, in hidden helms, in Kelzari observation rooms. Eyes turned toward the figure standing in Indomitable's command sphere. He could, with a word, order the drives of 100 warships to overload. He could scatter their fragments across the stars, erasing a great predator entirely. He also knew what that choice would look like to everyone else. He saw in his mind the hollowed-out hulls of Syndic ships drifting through ruined orbits. Civilian crews and conscripted auxiliaries, all dead because one man chose the expedient path. He saw the Heliox compact tightening trade in fear of human excess, the Kelsari withdrawing their tentative respect. He thought of the principle that had driven him since the moment he refused to retire to advisory councils, and instead took on the admiralty of a fledgling space navy. Power was not for revenge. Power was for protection. Lucien's earlier words echoed. Open a broadband channel, Tarek said. On Karzal Prime, Sarai felt the compulsion built into high-priority communications to display the incoming message. They could have ordered it cut, But that would have meant severing their last steady stream of data from the wider web. The face of a human admiral appeared above the central console, projected into the control tier. "My name is Tarik Elbaz," he said. His voice was calm, but behind it lay the steel of controlled anger. "You cheated us." He let that sentence sit in the air, simple as a hammer. "You sold us ships wired to explode under our feet. You built your trades on traps. You thought we would never see them. You thought we would take our loss and crawl away, or die quietly at your command. We chose otherwise." Around the galaxy, in ships and stations bound to the Syndic's network, screens and walls and holos relayed his words. Vrach captains whose consoles had just gone dead stared at the human's image, listening because there was nothing else to do. "You are fighters," Tarik continued. "We do not deny that. You built a formidable machine. But you built it on the assumption that only you could ever pull its levers. You were wrong." He gestured slightly, and Rena pushed a pre-composed command into the lattice. Across the captured Navy, weapons detached from targeting locks, shells ejected, reactors shifted to low-level maintenance states. It was a simple demonstration of control, carried out on a scale that no one present had ever witnessed. "Your ships now stand disarmed," Tarik said. "We could burn them. We could turn them on your worlds. We will not. Not if you choose another path." He knew he was not just speaking to Sarai Nul. He was speaking to every Syndic officer, every crew member, every polities observer. "You will stand down," he said. "You will release the worlds you hold in debt by force. You will submit your contracts to review by a council that includes those you have exploited. Your captains may choose to surrender their vessels for refit under new flags, or to retire them entirely." He leaned closer to the pickup, eyes hard. "Understand this. The leash you tried to fasten around our necks is now in our hands. If you ever again attempt to bind another people through such tricks, if you ever again attempt to turn a gift into a weapon against them, we will tighten it." He cut the transmission. The silence afterward on Karzal Prime's control tier was heavier than any explosion. Sarai Nul looked around at their officers, whose faces displayed not loyalty or defiance now, but calculation and, in many, deep shame. Their eyes had moved beyond Sarai's authority to the real question hanging in the air. What now? Across the wide Syndic spheres, reactions fractured. Some commanders, lifelong servants of the trade machine, tried to rally their crews to resist. It was a hollow effort. Their ships would not respond to them. Others, sickened by the realization of how expendable they had been in their own master's contingency plans, shut off their uniform's insignia and waited for instructions from elsewhere. At the fringes, world after world that had been held under ruinous contracts saw the sudden freeze in the weaponry that enforced those contracts, and knew, with the animal certainty of oppressed peoples, that a window had opened. Strategist Halener watched from her observation room, absorbing not only the tactical but the symbolic dimensions of the event. An upstart species, in its first major outing beyond its cradle, had turned an ancient predator's own tools against it, and then, crucially, had stopped short of raw annihilation. Instead, they had offered terms and made a case in moral and practical language. Halener smiled a small, private expression. The board had changed. New lines of influence were already being drawn in her mind. On Locus 9, amid the slow unwinding of battle tension, Margetta Alonso flipped through incoming comms and laughed out loud. "You see this?" she shouted to no one in particular. "Half the small yards in 3 sectors want to talk contracts. They've never seen anyone pull a stunt like this." In the Splinter Crown's central chamber, Jonas slowly disconnected Mimir from the primary node. The hum of the core faded from painful to background. The room smelled of overheated circuitry and fear. He looked at the battered faces of his squad, at the defeated guards leaning against scorched walls, and knew that the real work from here on would be done by others' negotiators, administrators, citizens. He was fine with that. His work had always been to clear the way. May walked the Indomitable's engine bay after the main fighting was done, boots clanging softly on the deck. She ran her hand along a drive casing, feeling the residual warmth. In her mind, she addressed the unseen Vrach engineers who had once designed this machinery to obey only them. You thought you knew everything this metal could be, she thought. You were wrong. We found more in it. We found more in ourselves. Rena, exhausted, slumped back in her harness as the flood of network noise subsided to a manageable hum. In the corner of her display, Mimir's utilization meter ticked down from a frenzied peak. Her thoughts wandered briefly to the moment that had changed everything. A hidden back door, a spiteful piece of code. She had taken that malice and turned it into understanding. It struck her as fitting for her species. Earth's official statements in the days that followed were measured, even as news networks across the stars filled with footage of crippled Syndic ships, liberated ports, and astonished analysts from Heliox to Kelsari space. The Vrak Syndic, once a monolithic threat, began to fracture into smaller blocks, some eager to integrate into a new order, others clinging to old ways. Without control of their navy, they could no longer enforce their more predatory contracts. The Salvagers Accord was amended for the first time in living memory. Language once designed solely to protect sellers now contained clauses about hidden control systems, hostile sabotage, and shared inspection rights. Heliox jurists and Kelsari strategists worked alongside human legal minds, all aware that the rules had to change or the next spiral of escalation would be worse. For humanity, the change was felt most sharply, not in laws or headlines, but in how other species looked at them. No longer as simple marks, no longer as harmless curiosities. In the narrow corridors of stations and yards, in conference halls and on surveillance screens, a new understanding took hold. Humans turned weakness into leverage. They took what was left at the curb and rebuilt it into something no one had anticipated. On Locust 9, some weeks after the war's central blaze had cooled into negotiation embers, Elian walked along one of the outer gantries and looked out over the yard. The Reclamation Armada hung in the black like a fleet of patched ghosts. Some ships bore fresh colors, their lines smoother where repairs had been completed. Others still showed raw welds and mismatched plates. Beside him, Margetta lit a small chemstick and inhaled thoughtfully. "Think they'll try that trick again?" she asked. Elian knew who she meant. "The Syndic?" he said. "Maybe not in the same way, but someone will. Somewhere, some future power will think it's clever to sell poison in a pretty bottle." He watched a small tug haul a battered frigate into a new berth. "And someone from Earth," he said, "will be there with a wrench and a neural probe, ready to take it apart." May's laughter floated up from below, as she argued with a junior engineer about stress tolerances. Rena's voice drifted faintly through a nearby open comm, directing a test of lattice routines on a newly captured hull that would be turned into a training vessel. Jonah passed by on a lower deck, carrying his helmet, listening but not intruding, already half in his next deployment. Admiral Tariq Elbaz, far away in a council chamber still being remodeled to handle the sudden increase in diplomatic traffic, briefed a room full of representatives who no longer underestimated him. At the edge of his awareness, he held always the memory of standing on a patched bridge, holding the reins of an enemy fleet, and choosing to wield that power with restraint. He intended for that choice, even more than the clever engineering or daring maneuvers, to define what it meant, in this new era, to be human.